They don't even put up a pretense anymore. I mean,
That's it. There you go. That's what I mean.
yeah, it's CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. We know what their leanings are, and so you make a choice of which one to watch, right? And the New York Times, I guess, still tries to put up a pretense, but nobody believes it. I'm not sure what they do at the Washington Post anymore. It's really kind of a circus over there. But yeah,
Right.
it's so there's that. But I think what it does though is, to me, what's really been pernicious about it all is it just has accelerated the pace of the balkanization of our society into these isolated tribes of people and living in their bubbles. You either live in a liberal bubble or a conservative bubble, and you've lost all your friends that you used to have friends that held opposing political views.
I can't believe it. I'm so fortunate to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome in the biggest way possible David Blackmon. I don't think that anyone really needs much of an introduction. If you're not on LinkedIn, if you're not reading Forbes, if you're not watching television, you're not hearing one of the premier voices in energy communications today. David, how's it going this morning? Didn't you just wrap up a show just a little bit ago?
Well, I wrapped one up yesterday, yeah, and actually had a great interview with a fellow who worked on as part of the new NPC study on natural gas that's going to be released Monday, and so yeah. But yesterday morning I recorded an episode with Michelle Manook, who is the CEO of Future Coal
Mm-hmm.
Coalition, I'm sorry, the trade association, the biggest trade association globally that represents the coal business. And it was really very interesting discussion. I hope everyone will watch.
No, and I look forward to watching that as well. It is, if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere that China was on track to double their coal plants.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just what renders everything we're doing so impotent here in America.
Right.
We're hamstringing our economy, doing all this crazy stuff in the energy space to make this minute reduction in carbon emissions here in the U.S. And China is doing things that are just overwhelm that and make everything we're doing essentially meaningless. And no one in the global community wants to admit it.
Right. It's very sad, but I picture the image of two people in a canoe, and one is trying to bucket water out of the canoe, and the other is bucketing water in the
Yeah,
canoe.
yeah. There's this great video. I just, as an aside, there's this wonderful video if you can find it out on YouTube, and I think it was filmed in Cambodia or Thailand. I'm not sure which, but it's this fella he's desperately trying to shovel water out of his canoe. He's got a canoe, and his wife is sitting there on the side pretending to wash bowls in the river that they're sitting in. But every time he turns his head away from her to desperately scoop out the water out of his canoe, she's just pouring it back in with one of the bowls. It's one of the funniest videos I've ever. Anyway, sorry, but yeah, that's exactly what we're
And I'm trying to find a way. I'm trying to find a way, and it could be dangerous trying to do it actually right now on the show, but I'm trying to find a way to verbally thread that needle between what people claim to care about, what they really care about, what the posturing is, and why people can't tell the truth.
doing.
Um,
Yeah, well, yeah.
and I know I know that in the lexicon of English language, there is going to be a string of words when put together might make some sense of this, but I'm still working on that sentence
Well, hey, don't worry
because so
about it
much
too
of it is.
much because if you believe the lady that's the new CEO at NPR, there's no such thing as truth anyway, so it doesn't matter.
But this is also part of the problem that we're having is that once people start taking away definitions of words, changing definitions and changing histories, now it's shifting sands. There's no solid place to
Yeah.
stand to begin a conversation, let alone an argument in the classic rhetorical sense of argument.
No, that's true. That's absolutely right. And I'm afraid that's kind of where we've gotten to as a society, mainly as a result of the corruption of our news media in America and really in the Western world. We no longer have what our founding fathers would have called a functioning free press. We have a propaganda industry that parrots a narrative every day and only reports stories that support the narrative. And it's really a dangerous thing for the preservation of a free society. And I wish there was some way to easily remedy it. I don't have the solution to it, but I can certainly see what the problem is.
Right. A good buddy of mine, Joey Mayers, he says, I can't fix stupid, but I can cater to it. And
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
right. And I think that in today's world, more than ever, I think because of the influx of information and the influx of the so much content coming at everybody every day at such a high speed. Um, Wallace Wattles in The Science of Getting Rich, he says that men shirk from the hardest work in the universe, which is consistent and consistent thought. Is to be thinking consistently is some of the most difficult work. And I understand why. We also live in stereotypes and in shorthand, because if not, we couldn't survive. We see a red octagonal, that's a stop sign. We can't pick apart everything or we'd be busy all day. But unfortunately, for issues that really matter, issues of governance, issues of politics, issues of not national interest, but national principle, a lot of people abdicate their responsibilities and they don't do a lot of the hard thinking themselves.
Yeah.
And they give up to the news media and other pundits. What is a way that people could work their way out of that if they wanted to?
Oh man, I don't even know what to tell you about that. I mean, it just is a matter of wanting to, first of all, and being willing to take what comes your way when you start talking and writing against the prevailing narrative. You run the risk of being canceled, losing jobs, losing friends, and because what you're saying is not necessarily popular. I could be a lot more popular as a writer if I would just parrot the talking points that come out of the White House every day in the stories I write. Um, but so much of what comes out of the White House just isn't true, and I just, for whatever reason, can't. I guess my mama taught me better than to say stuff that isn't right, and so it's a difficult thing for me. You have to be willing to be a social outcast to go against the prevailing wisdom, and I guess I've never had much of a problem being a social outcast. That's been my situation for a long time, so it's doesn't really bother me like it does a lot of people.
That is fascinating, and I appreciate that you bring up that point, because a lot of people are very afraid of being of being a social outcast, of being exiled by their peers, exiled by their job, exiled by their communities, because that does happen. That does
Yeah.
happen. But I find that whenever you take a position, for every detractor, everyone who attacks you, you're going to have at least one defender. And I think that's something that's missing, is that if you're being honest, if you're being truthful, if you're speaking with good intentions and goodwill, now you could be wrong, right? Like, it's possible to
Sure,
be
you get
sincerely
things wrong.
wrong, but if you're sincere, um, I think that there's a space for that. But most people don't. Again, they don't have the critical thinking skills, because a lot of life is coming at us too fast. Let me ask you this: what was your very first job related to oil and gas? Let me go back like that.
That's actually an interesting story. So I was in 19 when I was it was after my sophomore year in college. I came home and for the summer, and I told my dad that I was thinking about quitting school and just getting a job at a local hardware store and just figuring out how to make my own way without a college degree. 3 days later, 3 days later, my dad comes home. Comes home. He was a postman, and he came home and he said, "Hey, I had a talk with Alan Taylor today, and Monday morning you're going to go to work for his pipeline construction crew." Alan Taylor was a fellow that had a business, pipeline construction business located in Beeville, where I grew up. And I said, well, what am I going to be doing? He said, well, you're going to be a welder's helper. You're going to work with my good friend Biddy Hagler and be a welder's helper. And so, so that Monday morning, me and two of my friends whose fathers were also worried about dropping out of college showed up at Alan Taylor's yard, and they put us to work as welders helpers. And today, to go to work as a welder's helper on a pipeline construction crew in the oil and gas industry would probably, you'd have to have a month's training because it's dangerous work. You are using heavy equipment to grind welds, using an electric powered grinder. And if you don't do it right, you can get electrocuted. So there's hazard. It's hazardous work. Uh, our training lasted about 10 minutes. Then we got in the pickup and drove off to Three Rivers to start building the pipeline. Uh, and we worked 80-hour weeks. This was 1976. And then I did the same thing the next summer, 77. We worked for minimum wage, which was $2.10 an hour at the time. We worked 80-hour weeks. We got paid double time for overtime, though. So, I know it doesn't sound like a lot of money now, but back then, when a dollar was worth 8 times what it's worth today, it was pretty decent money. And we worked that whole summer. And at the end of that summer, I told my dad, there is not a chance in hell I'm going to drop out of college now. You taught me the lesson. But I got to do it again the next summer, too. But it was a really interesting experience. I learned a lot about the pipeline part of the business, and we built compressor stations on the Del Monte Farms down near Crystal City, Texas, the following summer. And it was just really good, honest work. Got to meet a lot of people. One fellow I worked with was this old guy who had been part of the original Humble Oil efforts, drilling wells in Saudi Arabia. And it was just a really great experience and gave me a real interest in the oil business.
Fascinating. And I'm sure that coming from from the college that you were and going in the summertime, and because obviously I've worked out in the field, just these crazy guys doing crazy stuff, and it's just a world apart from what you were used to otherwise, I'm sure, right?
Oh yeah, no, but of course I grew up in the middle of the South Texas oil patch. Beeville, there was a lot of drilling. There was a lot of operations going on around there. My family had a little farm outside of Goliad, Texas, about 20 miles from Beeville. And when I was growing up, there was periodically some drilling and pipeline activity on the ranch, and
Mm.
not never much money in it, but I was around it a lot as a kid, so I was very familiar with it, and was always interested in what was going on, but didn't really know much about it until I went to work on that pipeline crew.
And when you graduated college, what was your major when you went to school? What did you study, and what did you think you wanted to do?
Well, what I thought I wanted to do was major in music. I was a really good drummer, and so I got into the Longhorn band at the University of Texas, and but only did that for 1 year, and realized there's no money in that, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. And but I happened to pick up. My mother had a subscription to U.S. News and World Report, and every
Yes.
year U.S. News and World Report did an issue about what are the best things to major in college. And that particular year, there was a shortage of accountants, and the tax code was getting increasingly complicated. And I was good at math, and I thought, well, I can do that. So I decided to be an accounting major, got a degree in accounting, and coming out of college, I didn't make great grades. They were good enough, but I interviewed with the Texas comptroller because I thought I
Hmm.
might want to go to work for the comptroller in the state government. I was really interested in living in Austin. But then my dad got me an interview with Coastal State's office down in Corpus Christi. So I went down and interviewed with them, and gosh, within 5 days, I had a job offer from Coastal States to go to work, not in Corpus Christi, but in Houston, as an accountant in their revenue accounting group. And This was right at the time when Coastal Oscar Wyatt was forced to spin off what was then called Lavaca Gathering Company because of a big lawsuit, and I won't go into that. But that's how Valero was created, out of Lavaca Gathering Company, and I ended up doing all the accounting work related to that divestiture. And then it was also the time when the windfall profit tax was passed into law. And after a year, they made me the windfall profit tax specialist because nobody else wanted to do it. So, I know that was a
Interesting.
very long, winding road answer. Sorry.
No, 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 no. Actually, what I was considering was how fascinating it is to be able to see the inside of the business, the really in the lifeblood, because the numbers are what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
As my brother frequently says, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And so if you are not keeping an eye on the money, and you got to learn a bit of the business from the inside.
Yeah, and a
So
really
I find that
interesting
entirely
aspect of
fascinating.
it. Yeah, it was really interesting because of the big lawsuit and everything. It was in the news every day,
Mm-hmm.
and anyway.
Well, and let me ask you this: so, how long were you in accounting, and what was it that that finally pulled you out of accounting? Because
Well,
it's hard to picture you today as an accountant, staring at your shoes,
yeah,
sharpening your pencil.
I had this very odd career progression. So in '87, I went to work for what was then called Meridian Oil, but later became Burlington Resources, and it was a big independent producer that had a really visionary management team, and they pushed decision making authority way down in the organization, and gave us a lot of leeway to define our own roles in the company. And I figured out, probably 2 or 3 years after I went to work for Burlington, that one good way to, really progress in an organization is to volunteer for work nobody else wants to do. Okay. And so, so we got involved in a lot of audits. But we were the biggest producer of natural gas on federal lands in the
Hmm.
country. Okay. And the biggest producer in New Mexico, the state of New Mexico. So we first began to become the subject of several audits from the state comptroller's office in New Mexico, the state taxation and revenue division, and then later from the Minerals Management Service, the federal agency, on our royalty payments. They're just verifying you're doing it right. Well, they just held a meeting of our department one day and said, well, we need somebody who's willing to be the interface between the company and the auditors to make sure we do document production right and stuff like that. And nobody raised their hand, so I thought, well, okay, here we go. So I raised my hand to do that. And, and that led to, then later the company decided to create a role in regulatory affairs, and I raised my hand for that, and that was in eventually led to me going into the government affairs role around 1999, and so it was just a good way to advance in an organization, and again, even though it was work nobody else wanted to do, it was a really great way to learn so much about the business, because what they're auditing is how you do your business as a company. And we would do field trips to look at how the natural gas was produced. It was out of a coal seam in northwest New Mexico, the biggest production we had. And we had to build a special processing plant to separate the carbon dioxide out of the gas stream. And you learned how that happened. And
Hmm.
just a really great way to learn the actual business the company was in. And I look back on that, and just kind of every step in my career was a real good learning experience that allows me now, in my semi-retirement, to write about what's happening in the business, because in the process of all that, I was engaged in a lot of industry-wide projects, that I learned how the whole industry functions, and how public policy impacts the industry. So that's mainly what I write about, actually.
Right, and it's funny because at the tail there, of your tale, you had said that's where you began to get into some into government regulatory and compliance and things like that.
Yeah,
So I can see how you would see how that fits, and of course, on some levels, that's a lot of hot air, right? Because anyone
right.
can say anything into a microphone on one level. But on another level, that is literally where the rubber meets the road. Because when they say they're going to put a tax on something and then there's a tax on something, well, now there's a tax on something.
Yeah.
So it's funny how we move in those two worlds. Um, okay, this question just occurred to me. Much like in diplomacy, right? When we have ambassadors and we have a certain language that we must use when we employ diplomacy. Do you see a similar kind of language that's employed when it comes to domestic communication in terms of our energy policy?
Oh, for sure. I mean, everything you do in a government affairs role is about communications and effective communications, and knowing the subject matter you're talking about and being able to communicate that to a policymaker, whether it's a regulator or a member of Congress or their staff, who don't know really anything about the subject matter, okay? And that's not a criticism. If you're a member of Congress, people often criticize members of Congress for not knowing anything about energy. Well, there are people from other walks of life. I was in the industry, the oil and gas business for 40 years, and I learned new things every day. Every day. It's such a complex business that you're in, and the process, the enterprise of producing oil and gas and finding it and putting it in a pipeline and refining it and exporting it or delivering it to gas stations, all that is such a complex thing that to expect members of Congress or the regulators at the Environmental Protection Agency to really understand that business is unreasonable because they're dealing with 100 other things at the same time. So you have to really learn how to effectively communicate what you're trying to communicate. You can't just walk in and do what I just did a minute ago and run on at the mouth and go off on all sorts of tangents. You've got to be able to really communicate and get to the point very quickly and succinctly so that they can at least understand the highlights of what you're trying to do and what you think the government needs to do on whatever the issue happens to be. And I
Hmm.
got to where I was pretty good at that. And I testified a lot. I testified twice before Senate committees and did a lot of testimony at the Texas legislature and in Santa Fe and up in Cheyenne, Wyoming as well. And it being an effective communicator is really the most important part of that job. Then the other important part, of course, is knowing what you're talking about when you do it. You can't
Right.
just memorize a bunch of talking points and expect to have credibility when you go in and start getting asked questions by a committee or a member of Congress or their staff. And if you don't know the answers, well, you're going to look pretty stupid. So it's really important, I think, for companies, and I see it sometimes where they put somebody in a job in government affairs who doesn't really understand the business, and they end up not really being effective at the job because if you don't know the business you're trying to advocate for, well, you're probably not going to be real good at it.
Right. I find it very interesting that let's call, for lack of a better term, let's call the government in this case a black box. Okay, so just for this argument, you're going to go to the government and try to explain certain policy positions, certain things, but
Yeah,
you have to be factual. You have to be about the numbers and the nitty gritty and the reality, and you have to be on point like a surgeon's scalpel with your language.
yeah.
But somehow, when it comes out the other side of that black box, it all becomes the world is in peril. We're all going to die. We're going to have to start cooking our children because the world is going to end. And I just find that really fascinating, right? They need the numbers and they need the facts so they can turn around and spin that into the emotion.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, just how you said that just somehow brought that visual very.
And I got to tell you, I've got a great example of that just happened this week.
Please.
Tuesday morning, I got an email from a reporter at NPR who's with one of their national shows. And we had, I, I'm sure you noticed that ERCOT put out a warning Monday saying they could be caught short on generation capacity on Tuesday and Wednesday. That didn't happen, luckily. But they were doing a story on it, so I said I'd be happy to talk with you. She asked me for 5 minutes, and we talked for half an hour. Um, she was and did she did a really good report on it, and I appreciated the fairness of it. But when you listen to the report she filed, so I was telling her about the mechanics of why ERCOT was getting caught short and how that all evolved in terms of public policy over the last decade. But then in her story, she quotes, I think, three different professors from various universities, all of whom said, well, the problem is climate change. Well, the problem doesn't have anything really to do with climate change itself. The problem has been caused by insane public policy decisions the Texas legislature and governors over the last 20 years have made in response to all the hysteria about climate change. If they had made rational decisions in constructing and ensuring the model for our state energy grid is sensible and workable, we wouldn't have any problems. There should never be a time when the state of Texas has any issues related to reliability on our power grid. We produce more natural gas than every nation on earth except for Russia and Saudi Arabia in the state of Texas. There's no reason for us to ever have reliability issues on our grid unless we do stupid things like overloading it with wind and solar. And that's what we've done. It's been stupid public policy. Well, I was the only one to talk to her about it. That's why she spent half an hour with me because no one had ever said those things to her. And but that's just to your point about how all this all this hysteria and irrelevant stuff ends up causing all these displacements in the energy sector, and it's just an unfortunate aspect of what's happening in our society, really in general.
No, I concur, and I think that that happens quite a bit in overall, where someone is doing something, whatever it is that they're doing. Someone is complain. Okay, I'm going to make up a scenario. Family says, "Hey, you husband, father, whatever, dig a pool. We want a pool in the backyard." So the father goes, he starts digging a pool in the backyard. Like, okay, I'm shoveling out the dirt. Well, no, you can't put the dirt there. The dirt needs to go over there. Well,
Yeah,
okay, so now instead of just shoveling, now I have to get a wheelbarrow, right? And now I'm taking more expensive and it's taking longer. And then the neighbor says, no, but you have to put it somewhere else. And is that sort of like the mission creep that what I'm
yeah,
getting is if you're supposed to be building a pool, go and get the pool built. I mean, obviously, and I think this is something that most people mistake, and again, in good faith, about people in oil and gas. People in oil and gas are attacked as frequently as not caring about the environment, as not caring about the future, not caring about our children. And first of all, obviously, that's patently false on its face. I don't even know how you would
yeah,
give
it is.
credence to
Yeah,
something like that. That I care less about my son than someone who lives in Wisconsin. Like that's absurd, obviously. Um, but the people who work in oil and gas are at the very forefront of these issues because we know that we've got a target on our backs. We know that we're in a manner of speaking legally, morally, and financially responsible for the rest of the world to do what we're doing.
yeah,
And we have a target on our backs while we do it. And so no one cares more than people in oil and gas because we're the ones with the target on our backs and we're the ones doing the job that makes it possible for everyone to even have a soapbox to complain about what we do. And
Right.
I find that very incredibly disingenuous. And I find that very difficult to have an honest conversation with someone who can't admit to certain realities.
And yeah, and
Because then
that's
you're
a
not having
real
a conversation
problem.
with a rational person.
Right. I mean, you're right. I mean, you can't have an honest conversation anymore about any of it. I mean, the White House, we have this report from Bloomberg Thursday that the White House is now again considering having the president declare a climate emergency and taking all sorts of steps to hamstring the oil and gas industry. Well, I mean, that's just silly. All that is a campaign tactic trying to keep the money flowing in from the billionaires who fund the environmental industry. And we're revealing more and more about how that money flows from all these foundations, the Park Foundation and the Rockefellers and the Gettys and Bill Gates and Melinda Gates into these environmentalist groups, and then flows from there into the Democratic Party's campaign coffers. That's all that's about. But you can't have that honest conversation. You'll never see anyone at CNN say that, or the New York Times or the Washington Post. You can't have an honest conversation about it. But that's what's happening. It would be so ridiculous to impose heavy restrictions, even more than they've already done, on the oil and gas business. Our business has achieved record production levels in both oil and gas to meet global demand for our products, and at the same time dramatically reduced carbon and methane emissions. At the same time, you're dramatically increasing production. Well, that hasn't happened anywhere else on Earth. Okay,
Right.
so if you harm the oil and gas industry here in America, what's going to happen? All this capital is going to flow out of the United States to other parts of the world where the regulations are not nearly as strong and the industry doesn't care nearly as much, and you're going to increase emissions, not reduce them. And so it's also cynical. It really makes me angry sometimes.
No, I agree. And it's funny how the contra proves the point, which is if the more restrictions you put to make it cleaner here, the more outflow that's going to go to other parts of the world where
Yeah,
they don't care like we do. So,
right.
right. But it begs the question, because again, environmentalists, and again, loosely speaking, right? Um, they come to people in oil and gas and they say, what you're doing is not sustainable. Say, okay. And actually, I had a little bit of a very, very minor exchange with somebody on LinkedIn regarding this. And here's the question: at what point is this not sustainable for squeezing oil and gas? Right? Like the same way they say that what we're doing is not sustainable in fossil fuels, but how is it sustainable, the argument against oil and gas?
Oh,
Because at
well,
some point that argument doesn't work. Right? I mean, eventually, if you follow their logic, okay, we're going to phase out oil and gas. Now what? Where's the answer to that?
yeah. Well, I'll tell you where it's not going to be sustainable is when the price of a gallon of regular gasoline gets to $5 a gallon. That's immediately not sustainable for the
You got
politicians
it.
who caused that to happen. Okay.
You
And
got it.
that's what the Biden administration, if it does this climate emergency thing, that's the risk they're going to be taking. Because if you shut down U.S. oil production, demand isn't going to slow down. Okay, you're still going to have the global demand. It's going to have to be met from somebody somewhere. And if you can't meet the demand, then what's going to happen? The price is going to skyrocket, and American consumers are going to pay the cost. And they know that at the White House, but they don't care. This is just a way to placate their base and appeal to young voters who don't know anything about any of this. And that's what it's a cynical election ploy. And unfortunately, it's so hard to get that message through all the noise in the news media to help people really understand why it's happening to them.
Right. I think that the corporate situation with the news media, well, but in a way, I think in a way, some things are better. which I know is a hard
You'll have
road
to
to take.
convince
But
me of that, but go ahead.
let me explain it to you. Let me explain it to you. And I have a reason. I have a grain of a thought for that, which is
Okay.
this. And it's and I'm going to arc back to something I learned a long time ago, and it's called "Have a Nice Day" racism, right? Which is
Okay.
you can have someone and say like, you could meet somebody and you could be like, well, you have a nice day, and you'd be very pleasant and very nice, but when you turn around, you're going to deny their loan, right? You're going to deny their loan, right? Because
Oh
you're
yeah,
a
yeah.
have a nice day, it's beautiful. No, 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 no. Um, and what I mean is that and now the mask is off. You see, because maybe 20, 30 years ago, you thought that there was an unbiased media. But today we know for a fact that is not the case. It's exposed. It's very
Yeah.
naked in in the position that it's taking and the ideology that it's pushing. That's why I mean that it's better, because at least you know very well what bucket of the market of ideas is this coming from. You're not being tricked, say. Where
Right.
before maybe a
Yeah.
lot of people arced back to the days of Walter Cronkite and okay, but everyone got the news from Walter Cronkite. But if he lied to you, everybody's been lied to.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right. They don't even put up a pretense anymore. I mean,
That's it. There you go. That's what I mean.
yeah, it's CNN and MSNBC and Fox News. We know what their leanings are, and so you make a choice of which one to watch, right? And the New York Times, I guess, still tries to put up a pretense, but nobody believes it.
Right.
I'm not sure what they do at the Washington Post anymore. It's really kind of a circus over there. But yeah,
Right.
it's so there's that. But I think what it does though is, to me, what's really been pernicious about it all is it just has accelerated the pace of the balkanization of our society into these isolated tribes of people and living in their bubbles. You either live in a liberal bubble or a conservative bubble, and you've lost all your friends that you used to have friends that held opposing political views, but now they won't speak to you, they won't return your phone calls and things like that. And that's been a very sad development, I think, in our society, because it creates a situation like you have with this trial with Donald Trump in Manhattan, where everyone knows it's not possible for him to receive a fair trial in Manhattan. Okay. It's just not. You're not going to seat a jury that's going to be able to render an impartial verdict in a trial. So that's really the jury system in America is the very foundation of our legal system. And we have now parts of the country where that no longer functions. And it's largely because of this tribalism that we now have going on in the country. And it's a very dangerous thing for the continuance of our society.
No, I concur. I concur absolutely. And as you said, part of it is this balkanization, this breaking people down into camps in different ideologies and identity politics. And I think much like what we were saying before, that begins to twist and contort what might otherwise have been a normal, friendly conversation between two neighbors. One is a conservative and one is a
Right.
liberal. But it's like, what, Bob, I really don't agree with you, but guess what? I live next door to you. How different am I from you if I literally physically live next door to you? I'm
Right.
not that different from you. So I respect your difference of opinion. And that's something that I'm very saddened by, although I try to maintain it as much as I can as an individual, is whenever I'm attacked for my positions, whatever, I try to take a 30,000-foot view and I say, I don't agree with you, but I believe that you're a good American. I believe that you
Right.
want to be a good American. And I believe you're trying to attain to that the best way you know how. I believe that you're mistaken, but I give you credit that at least you want to put 2 cents into the argument. Um, because again, that goes back to, it takes all of us for this nation. And it's very sad when you can't talk to your neighbors, when people don't want to talk to you for your beliefs. How
Well,
would we get over
when
that?
when I was growing up, well, you have to stop treating everything as a crisis. Okay, we don't have a climate crisis. We don't. It's a fiction. Okay, but it's done by cynical politicians trying to create that sense in order to help them invoke these extremely radical policies that would have never been tolerated in our country as recently as 25 years ago. Okay.
Right.
So they have to make everything into a crisis in order to justify their policy decisions. That's the first thing. And then the other thing they do is demonize anyone who disagrees with them as an actively evil person. Okay. We didn't used to do that in our country. You could disagree on tax policy or energy policy or any other kind of policy you want to talk about, and not feel the need to consider the person you're arguing with as an evil person. But the politicians in the media mimics them now. Have decided that that's what they have to do in order to pursue these extremely radical policy agendas, and it's kind of hard to go back from that. Okay.
David, I don't want to interrupt you, but there was a turning point when that happened. I think that there are some pundits and some critics who actually have a moment for when that happened. And that was the Bork Senate confirmation hearings.
That was a real germinating point of it. And then the election of Bill and Hillary Clinton in 1993. And, their whole philosophy was based on, well, we don't debate with the opposition anymore. We just demonize the opposition. They were disciples of Saul Alinsky, and they took over the whole Democratic Party. And so, but yeah, the Bork hearings were a real germination point of that.
And please forgive me if I'm not mistaken, but wasn't Senator Joe Biden a big hand in that at that time? I'm not sure. I'm just asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe Biden, Joe Biden has this long history. It was just fascinating to me in 2019 that the Democratic Party decided to turn its fortunes over to Joe Biden, of all people.
Of all people.
Right. I mean, it was like they chose the very worst and most disgraceful person they could find in their party, who's been around for the longest, to be their whatever you want to call him, representative and leader of their party. It's like they actively went out and chose the very worst person for the job, and pretty amazing.
I think they were painted into a corner by it, though, because
they didn't have a big bench, did they?
Right, they didn't, and not only that, but if his biggest claim to fame was he was vice president, and you're like, oh, is that like like in font size? What is that? 42 font? What a Senate staffer? That's 12 point. No. What vice president? That's 42 font. Here, you go front. You go in the front.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty sad.
But the main thing was they knew they could rely on him to just say and do whatever they told him to say and do. I mean, that's really the reason, and that's what he's done.
Right. And that's what he's done, of course. Well, so at least he's kept up his end of the bargain. Now, to who we don't know, but he's kept up his end of the bargain, I'm sure, because he's still there. Yeah. So, and then of course the poison pill, which is if you got rid of him, who would take over? So they made sure that he was absolutely protected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could go down that.
No, I don't want to.
Road if you want, but
I don't.
It's just pretty depressing subject.
Exactly. So let's move on. But I do want to thank you though. In thinking about this, one thing that I've noticed is that you're an outlier, and it seems like you've been an outlier for most of your career, and I highly respect that. Of course, we have to all operate within the bounds of the law, society. I like driving on the right side of the road because I don't want to get hit, in a drive-on collision. So of course, I don't mind laws. But when there's people who are willing to buck conventional wisdom, add some critical thinking to the conversation, I think that's really sorely missing today. And so I really sincerely appreciate all the work that you do and other energy communicators in this space. It's trying to. Well, no, but thank you. You've been doing this infinitely longer than I have. You've been on the front line of the trenches, and we need more voices like you who have more of a space, so that way people can slow down, understand what's really happening. But it's like everything else, David. At some point, everyone has a master to serve, and everyone has to pay the rent. right? Or pay the
Right.
mortgage.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I can believe whatever I want to believe, but if I have to pay my bills, I'm going to do that. But that's sadly what's happened, like with the news media, right? Like right now, it doesn't matter what the truth may or may not be. What matters is advertising dollars. That's what
Right.
matters. And
Yeah.
so whatever drives that, and it's become a perversion. I think it's become a perversion of where we should have been. And you're right. I think the founding fathers would be rolling over in their graves if they saw a
Oh, I
lot of
do
what was
too.
going on
Yeah.
today.
I mean, I just think it. They would have, of course, they could have never imagined how society would have evolved, and but I think they would be just horrified at the state of the news media in this country right now. And I think that Joseph Goebbels would be thrilled, because that's
Right.
what we really have, is a set of propaganda platforms that don't really give a damn very much about what's really true or not. And I mean, again, going back to the new CEO at NPR, she actively says that the First Amendment to the Constitution, which is the very foundation of a free press in America, is our country's biggest impediment now. The First Amendment. And this is the lady that's running NPR, folks. So that to me is just, she's just a perfect poster child for the state of the media in America today.
Fascinating. I just, nothing can go on forever. And I just wonder how long, because I know that the left tend to eat themselves after a while, right? You're
Yeah,
just not left enough now. And right, we just keep
right.
moving further and further. It'll be interesting to watch them sort of come apart. I just hope that they don't drag too much of the country with them before they self-destruct, because they're going to.
Yeah, I mean that is the problem, right? Because they really control every lever of power in the country today, except for the Supreme Court. And so, yeah, I mean, if they start to kind of fall apart and self-destruct, then they're going to probably take a big part of the country with them. And so that's we live in very dangerous times. I don't think there's anyone who can make the case otherwise, and it's largely because of self-inflicted wounds and no other reason.
Yes. No, I agree completely. Um, David, I really want to thank you once again. This has really been a
Well,
very
thank you.
fascinating
This has been
conversation.
fascinating. Yeah, this
Um,
isn't the usual interview I do.
that's awesome. Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Where, and I agree that we do live in dangerous times. I was going to hesitate to say, but why would I do that? I have to follow the lead of David, right, and be an outlier and just not worry about
Yeah,
it.
just be an
Um,
outlier. Let's go.
let's just be an outlier. Wallace Wattles in The Science of Getting Rich, he says, don't believe the people that say the world is going to the devil. The world is not going to the devil. The world is going to God. Okay, now that's one. Let's put that aside for a moment. Okay. I believe that there's always ups and downs, right? And it's always
Oh yeah.
sometimes the opportunities are more than the challenges, and sometimes there's more challenges than opportunities. But as Alan Watts says, that the game of yin and yang, the black and the white, the yin yang that's been, says that that's part of the game, and that's part of the tension. Is black going to win? Is white going to win? Is evil going to win? Is good going to win? I thoroughly believe that good always wins. Why?
At the
Because
end
if
of the
evil
day,
was going to
yes.
win, evil would have won already. This is my personal belief. I don't take
Yeah.
away an iota from what's going on in our country today. I don't take an iota away from the tragedies, from the suffering that people have. But I do believe that the arc is continual to the good, and I will never. No one can convince me otherwise that the world is not continually getting better. Um, Party politics may
Um,
sell you
I
a
think it
different
has stops
idea.
and starts, but yes, the general trend is to the good.
The
Yes.
general trend, yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, infant mortality rates are lower.
Right.
Medicines, life expansion. No, I mean this is the time the ancient Greeks dreamed about. That I could pick up
Yeah.
I could pick
Yeah.
up a little black box, and I have all the world's information right here. I mean, Aristotle could never have imagined what we have today. But it doesn't mean that it isn't dangerous. And it doesn't mean that good shouldn't be constantly be fought for. And that's why I really respect you for being out there on the forefront of telling the truth and being honest about the positions that are going on, and not buying a lot of the froth on the wave that we're being sold all the time. I really respect
Well,
that. Thank you,
it's
David.
easy. It's easy to do because everything you just talked about that's gotten better in recent times would never have happened without oil and gas.
Oil and
Okay. Oil and
gas.
gas has been the foundation of all of those improvements in flourishing, as Alex Epstein likes to call it, human flourishing on the face
Yes.
of the earth over the last 120 years. None of that could have happened without oil and gas. So I'm perfectly happy to defend what to me has been really, I think, the most important industry ever invented by mankind. Okay. I'm happy to take that position. If I'm an outlier, I'm glad to be the outlier. I'm
Right.
more than happy to do that. And if I can do that for the rest of whatever career I have left, that's very gratifying to me.
Sir, I would like to take up the standard and join you in that fight along the way, because I think that's a fight that's worth fighting for, and the truth is always worth fighting for. So I really
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Well,
David, do
thank
you
you.
have
This is
any other last thoughts or anything that we didn't kind of get to, or anything else
no,
you want to
just keep the
share?
faith. Both if you're in the oil and gas business, you should be proud of what you're doing, because what you're doing is sustaining our ability to flourish as a race, and sustaining the American dream for millions of people. And it would all collapse without you. So don't ever let anybody shame you for what you do for a living. It's vitally important to all of us and to your kids and grandkids. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, frankly, is to do what little I can to help secure the future for my grandchildren. And I want them to have the same kind of life that I've enjoyed and been blessed with. And so that's what keeps me getting up early every morning.
I'm going to give you a big Texas hell yeah, brother. Exactly right. Hell yeah, brother. Well, David, would you be kind enough to join us back on the show at a
Oh,
future
absolutely.
date?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, I
Really
appreciate that.
enjoyed this. This has been great.
Well, David, I appreciate that. It's been great for me too. So, ladies and gentlemen, the incomparable David Blackmon. Be sure to follow him on LinkedIn, on Twitter or X, on Substack, right?
Substack. You can find
On
everything I do
Substack.
gets linked to on Substack. Yeah.
On Substack. So if you don't find him, you're trying hard not to. So, ladies and gentlemen, all the connections will be in the links in the descriptions and link below. So, thank you very much, everyone. You have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.
The Oilfield Leader Podcast is brought to you by executive producer Daniel Corral, executive producer Jim Lynn, executive producer and voice talent, me, Mad Matt, production assistant Caleb Knott. The Oilfield Leader Podcast is produced and hosted by Christian Lombardini. Copyright 2024. The Oilfield Leader and Christian Lombardini, all rights reserved. Peace.